Meteorologist Dave Baker. Happy Monday to you. Of course, we're watching Tropical Depression number 18. Still waiting for the 12 o'clock update, or the 12 o'clock update here from the National Hurricane Center. So you may see the coordinates change there on the left-hand side of the screen unless we've got some kind of an extra update. Usually they do this update here a few minutes before the top of the hour. And I don't know if you've noticed, but the times of the releases of these advisories are a little different now that we've switched the clocks back to standard time. So most of you during the summertime are used to seeing 4 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 7 o'clock. But that changes because everything runs on universal time. But since we have changed our time here in the United States, now everything comes down a little bit earlier. So rather than a 1 o'clock advisory, we now have a noon advisory. So it does come down a little bit earlier. Unfortunately, that doesn't fall in line very well with the start of Let's Talk Tropics, which is at noon, because I'm still looking at the 10 o'clock advisory here, the 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock Eastern, 9 o'clock our time advisory there. But so far have not seen an update here for that. So I'm going to try to get that going here in a little bit. So we'll just go ahead and go on through what we've got so far. And if I get that update, I'll go ahead and put it up there on the left-hand side of the screen. First of all, it is a warm and windy and humid day here in Lafayette. 84, but it feels more like 87. Yeah, that's feeling a lot like November, isn't it? The dew point at 67, which has dropped off a little bit from yesterday. It was in the lower 70s, keeping things very, very humid. So our humidity now at 57%, but those winds gusting out of the south, southeast, 14 up to 31 at times, and the pressure's at 29.93. So windy conditions are going to continue on here for the remainder of the day. And as far as the radar is concerned, we are seeing some scattered showers and thunderstorms back over portions of looks like over portions of Texas. We're starting to see a little bit more in the way of some scattered showers and thunderstorms out there. But at least locally, we are not seeing a whole lot of rain right now. And I don't believe we're going to be seeing a whole lot of rain across the region, at least for today. But going into tomorrow, I do believe that we are going to be seeing a little bit more when it comes to the amounts of rain as we head into, let's say, Tuesday, especially during the afternoon. So just kind of bear with me here as I'm trying to update. I just got those brand new coordinates there. So we're going to get that new coordinate there on the left. Looks like 15.1 north. Let me just check the pressure there real quick. Looks like the pressure has come down to 1,000 millibars. So there are your new coordinates that you've got there on the left-hand side of the screen. So we can go ahead and move along. So 15.1 and 76.4 are your new coordinates there. Check it out. There's your traffic cams. Again, we've got a mix of sun and clouds across most of Acadiana. It is going to be a very windy day today. And the reason for that is you've got low pressure that's moving out of the desert southwest, and that's eventually going to start to kind of cruise off toward the northeast. That upper level pattern has a pretty good dip in the jet stream here down to the south. So this low here is going to go ahead and continue to cruise on toward the northeast. But then there's another trough that's back here to the west that's going to replace that. And that might come into play when it comes to our tropical weather. A wind advisory is going to be in place for today. So that's also going to be causing some rougher conditions in the offshore waters. And we've already seen some of the wave heights getting up into the 3 to 6 foot range, then even higher as you get farther out into the Gulf of Mexico. So it's going to be a pretty rough day out there. Small craft advisory in place. But because we've got those waters that are continuing to pile along the coast with those strong southerly winds, we've got a coastal flood warning now for West Cameron Parish, then down the coast into portions of Texas, and then East Cameron, including Vermilion, Iberia, St. Mary, and also into Terrebonne, Lafourche, and then all the way eastward along the Louisiana coastline, we have a coastal flood advisory. So there will be above normal tides down on the coast, and there could be some minor coastal flooding, so keep that in mind. So let's get in here. We've got Tropical Depression number 18. Earlier this morning, it was potential tropical cyclone, but Recon was out there and they found a close center of circulation. They're starting to get a little bit more convection around the center. So it's got those tropical characteristics. So it can now officially be called a tropical depression. And the update there is on the left with the current coordinates, wind speed, as well as the pressure. And on the big picture here, you can see where number 18 is over the southern part of the Caribbean Sea. And it is getting a little bit better organized here off toward the west. Patty, meanwhile, is way up here, and that has dissipated. So we are done with Patty there as it continues to move off toward the northeast. The National Hurricane Center is now put in its last advisory there. So you got tropical depression number 18 over the Caribbean. And you still got a bit of a trough there north of the north of the Caribbean islands that has a slight chance for some development, but I really think all that is going to be absorbed by tropical depression number 18, which is eventually expected to be Tropical Storm Rafael. That is the next name on the list. So there's the low pressure area. The center's probably right about in there. I'd love to see if I can get this to actually make a circle without putting a line on the bottom there. But we've got that low-level circulation. The recon has been out there, and it's kind of got a little bit of a west-north or a north-northwesterly movement to it, and it's very slow. But they've gone ahead and put up hurricane warnings now here for the Cayman Islands, as we are expecting this to strengthen into Rafael and could possibly be a hurricane by the time it reaches the Cayman Islands and the western tip of Cuba. And there's a little closer view where you can see some of that low-level circulation on the visible satellite imagery. So it's going to be starting to get kind of breezy there up to around Jamaica, and they are expecting tropical storm conditions, and they have a tropical storm, or rather a hurricane, or rather a tropical storm warning is now in effect for the areas of Jamaica, while we've got a hurricane warning now that's in effect for the Cayman Islands, and hurricane watches have been posted for the western parts of Cuba, as it is expected to be a hurricane as it moves into the Gulf of Mexico. And you're probably looking at that cone, and you can see that much of southeastern Louisiana, even southeastern portions of Acadiana, are within that 5-day cone. But you don't want to get too anxious about this one, because the weather conditions over the northern part of the Gulf of Mexico are not going to be very friendly to a tropical system. In fact, it's going to be rather unfavorable. So even though the conditions are really good now for strengthening here for days 1, 2, and 3 as it moves there over the western tip of Cuba, once it gets into the Gulf of Mexico, there's going to be some colder water as well as a lot of wind shear. Remember, the patterns are really starting to change a lot as you start to get into November and December. That's where you're starting to see more of those deeper cold fronts that start to pull in down into the deep south. So those conditions are not going to be too favorable. So it's going to be a little bit different than what we see during the summer, where those waters are so incredibly warm, and a lot of times you can continue to see strengthening all the way up to the coast. Well, that doesn't look like it's going to happen this time around. In fact, we'll get the opposite, where we are expecting weakening. But most of the models really are in line with each other for the track for days 1, 2, and 3. And then because of a high pressure ridge that's going to be over the Atlantic and a cutoff low that's going to be over the desert Southwest, all is going to be dependent on how fast that cutoff low wants to open up and start to eject toward the east. If it doesn't happen, this is probably going to continue more on a westerly track. If it deepens and starts to pull off to the northeast, that should tug it northward, and some strength is going to have to deal with it as well. If it gets a little stronger, it'll turn more northerly, and if it stays kind of weaker, it won't even be bothered by those troughs as it moves off toward the west. But the intensity models have kind of been all over the place over the last couple of days. Yesterday we were seeing a couple 3 models maybe going up into major hurricane status, but the majority were staying in the high-end tropical storm, low-end hurricane. Today, most of these models are still kind of hovering in that same area, in that high-end tropical storm, low-end hurricane here, going from days 2 all the way out to day 5. But then you start to see a lot of the trends going down once you get into day 4. Now remember, we're not expecting this to get close to shore until maybe Friday of this week. So that's day 5. So you can see there is a little bit of weakening even if it wouldn't be making landfall. And I will tell you, there are some models that have this completely dissipate before it even reaches the coast. So let's go through the hurricane models first, as they kind of zero in and give me a little more idea of how strong these are going to be. And with the HWRF, this maintains it as a hurricane into the middle part of the Gulf of Mexico. And then once it starts to get into day 4, this is going to be going into early Friday, there is some weakening. So it goes from about 85 to 95 knots down to about 45 knots. So you get a considerable drop in intensification there as you get into day 4 and 5. So it's fairly strong there in the southeastern Gulf, and then it kind of meanders and starts to die out. I don't know if you noticed, though, back to the west, or rather to the east, on those last few frames, there's a little ripple of energy that's coming into the eastern Bahamas as well. There are a lot of models that are indicating maybe another low coming in. Could that possibly be Sebastian? Pretty good chance there. So the HAFS model also brings this very close to hurricane strength as it goes into the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico, and then as it gets closer to the northern Gulf Coast, it does tend to kind of wipe out there, as it's going to be affected by dry air as well as wind shear, and also it's going to be moving over some slightly colder waters that may not be able to sustain tropical systems. So both of these models are pretty much in line with the track, and they're also pretty much in line with the intensity forecast too. So global models is where we'll go next. And the GFS has a tropical depression or a tropical storm coming into either the southeastern Louisiana coast or the southern Mississippi coast. It's a lot stronger as it moves past the Cayman Islands and Jamaica, and then it starts to kind of fall apart as that trough pulls in from the west. The Euro from earlier today, and again, I'm only showing you the next 5 days. I know if you've watched Let's Talk Tropics, we usually go out 10, but because we're just going to specifically focus on Tropical Depression 18, or what will likely become Rafael, we'll just look at the next 5 days, because most of the models are indicating something getting closer to the coast by about 5 days. And the Euro model is very similar to the GFS, strengthening initially and then weakening once it starts to push into the Gulf of Mexico. Canadian model is a lot faster, though. It actually makes a landfall over the Florida Panhandle sometime on like Thursday, I think is what this is going with. So by the time you get to the end of that 5-day period, it's already dissipated over parts of northern Alabama and Georgia. But the Canadian is also quite a bit more robust when it comes to this trough coming in from the west and picking it up and sliding it off toward the northeast like that. So the Canadian has a pretty good trough to come in, and the Icon model also has a pretty good trough coming in, but it kind of misses the tropical system. But notice what happens when this moves into the Gulf of Mexico. Rather than being bothered by that trough, it's so incredibly weak that it just kind of ignores it and kind of slides a little bit farther toward the west. So all of the global models are showing strengthening for days 1, 2, and 3. And then it's going to start to run into some problems for day 4 and 5, and you'll probably get some weakening there. Icon model also, though, like the earlier hurricane models in the GFS, are also showing possibly another tropical system trying to develop out here north of the islands here, going out into about 5 days. So again, we've got Rafael. We had Patty, which is dissipated. Rafael is what we're watching right now. And then there's the possibility we could see Sebastian before the week is over, so we'll watch out for that. So let's just kind of compare the 5-day picture here for all 4 models. There's the GFS. The Euro is a little bit slower, keeping it out in the Gulf waters. The Canadian model, as I said, has it already inland, so after 5 days, it's way up here, so it's already kind of cruised around and made its way onshore of the Florida coast. But we've also got the Canadian that's starting to pick up on another low out to the up to the east rather. And the Icon model is just kind of showing a westward drift across the central part of the Gulf of Mexico. So as we look at all of the models, global and hurricane specific models, everything seems to be pretty much in agreement for the first 3 days, and then days 4 and 5, you get kind of a wide range on track, and you also, for the most part, they're in agreement when it comes to weakening as it moves into the Gulf waters. Those water temperatures in the northern Gulf, especially here along the coast, have already dropped below 80 degrees, so that will inhibit any strengthening as it gets closer to the coast, and the tropical cyclone heat potential is quite high still over the western part of the Caribbean Sea. So that's why we think there's a pretty good chance that we're going to see some strengthening between now and day 3 as it passes the western tip of Cuba. Now, there's also a possibility it could kind of grabs onto some of that heat potential in the loop current over the southeastern part of the Gulf of Mexico. That would be the only thing that would allow it to maintain strength. I don't think it would get any stronger, but it would at least be able to maintain strength. But then after that, it's going to hit those colder waters, and it's also going to hit a considerable amount of wind shear. There's a lot of wind shear currently along the northern Gulf Coast, but where this system is developing right now and where it's about to go is showing relatively low wind shear. So here's your tropical depression right now, and by about day 3, it's going to be out here. So between here and there, you only got a little bit of moderate wind shear to deal with. But going into the latter part of the week, when this low is expected to get closer to the coast, you can see that that wind shear scoots even farther out into the Gulf of Mexico. Again, there's just way too many things that would inhibit any strengthening. So at the very least, it would maintain its current strength, or it would eventually weaken as it gets a little bit closer to the coast. So right now, I'm not super concerned about this because it's still a little too early in the forecast to know whether or not this is going to come in our direction or whether or not it's even going to make it to the northern Gulf Coast. But I will say that we're pretty confident, based on the colder waters and the extra wind shear, that this won't have much of a chance to continue on a strengthening path as it moves toward the northern Gulf Coast. The next couple of weeks, though, are still forecast to be somewhat busy. Remember, I showed you that other low that could possibly be Sebastian. So the global tropics hazard outlooks going into this latter part of the week is still on the high side. This will refresh tomorrow, and we'll have the new one for you on Wednesday because it kind of comes down during the middle part of the afternoon. But that week 3 is still showing a little bit of elevated activity there over the western part of the Caribbean into that third week in November. So at least at this point, according to this graphic, it doesn't look like hurricane season really wants to shut down just yet. And those are the areas that are the most favorable place that we would see tropical development. The western part of the Caribbean, the western Atlantic from the Bahamas up to maybe near Bermuda, and then sometimes you get a few of them that will cross over the middle part of the Atlantic. But a lot of your tropical systems that develop during November out here in the western part of the Caribbean Sea tend to go more in this direction. So it is a little unusual to see something coming more traditionally in that direction during the month of November. So there's some concern out there. No need to panic about this one. If you've still got some hurricane snacks that are left over, go ahead and keep them on hand. Again, if this is going to slide in here and stall, that might be a good chance for some heavy rain, but even that part of the forecast is uncertain. But as far as a full-blown hurricane coming to Louisiana or anywhere along the northern Gulf Coast, right now that does not seem to be likely. It seems like areas from the Cayman Islands to western Cuba are the most likely folks to see a hurricane out of this system, while anywhere else along the Gulf Coast would most likely at best see a tropical storm. So right now, nothing to worry about. There are no watches or warnings up for the northern Gulf Coast. Of course, that could possibly change as we go through time. So don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel, and also turn on those notifications. And if you noticed this morning, my forecasts are now being heard on Big 102.1, Planet Radio 106.7, and Freedom 95.1. And also in between all these forecasts, if you wouldn't mind following my social media pages. That way, if we're not doing any kind of live broadcast, I'll give you the updates on Tropical Depression number 18 or what might become Rafael a little bit later on in the day. And the little programming note, tomorrow, Wednesday, and Thursday, I'm going to be working with the South Louisiana Swim League, as we've got our high school district championships that are going to be coming up over the next 3 days. And those happen during the middle of the day, so I will not be doing Let's Talk Tropics at noon. Lucky for you, though, because we've got a tropical system out there, I'm probably going to launch a Let's Talk Tropics probably in the 9 o'clock hour or right around 9, and then I'll have another one later in the afternoon after the swim meets are over. That way you still get your updates on Let's Talk Tropics. It's just going to be a little bit of a different time, and you're going to get a bonus Let's Talk Tropics for Tuesday, Wednesday, as well as Thursday. So that's going to be a little programming note. Make sure you turn on those notifications. That way you'll know, because I'm not exactly what time these videos are going to drop. I can just tell you one's going to be in the morning and one's going to be in the afternoon, but the exact time, because I'm waiting for these updates from the National Hurricane Center, it might be not exactly at the top of any hour there. So put those notifications on and you will get the alert that Let's Talk Tropics is available and ready to be watched. Well, I'm meteorologist Dave Baker. Hope you have a great afternoon. Of course, stick with my social media pages if we see any changes when it comes to Tropical Depression number 18 or what probably will become Tropical Storm Rafael. Have a great afternoon. I'll see you tomorrow.